The first bell rang sharply across the school courtyard, echoing off the walls like a signal that another day of chaos, chatter, and youthful energy had begun. Students poured in through the main gate, laughing, shouting, teasing, and exchanging stories from the weekend. But in the middle of that vibrant sea of noise walked a single girl who seemed almost invisible, Alina. She stepped through the school doorway with her eyes lowered, clutching her backpack strapped tightly, as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. Her hair fell slightly over her face, and she walked with soft, almost measured steps. She wasn't just quiet, she had an aura of deep thoughtfulness, like someone who carried more stories inside her than she was ready to share. It was her first day, but instead of curiosity or excitement, she felt a heavy weight sitting in her chest. She had shifted schools several times, and every time, the pattern was the same. People judged her silence long before they took the time to understand it. She hoped just this once that things would be different. But as soon as she entered the classroom, whispers began. "Who's the new girl? She looks weird. Why won't she look up? Maybe she doesn't talk. Maybe she thinks she's too good for us." The bullies, Sana, Raida, and Fahad were already eyeing her like a new target, had just entered their territory. They were known throughout the school for picking on anyone who seemed different, and Alina's quietness was enough for them to judge her instantly. The teacher introduced her gently. "This is Alina. She has recently transferred here. Please make her feel welcome." A few polite claps echoed weakly across the room, but most students were too busy exchanging looks and snickering. Alina walked to her seat near the back, sliding into her chair as quietly as a feather touching the ground. But even her silence didn't spare her. Sana leaned forward. "Hey. Why didn't you say anything? You can't talk or what?" Rita giggled. "Maybe she's a robot. Look at her face, no expression." Fahad smirked. "Leave her. People like her think they're better than everyone. She won't last a week here." Alina heard every word, but she didn't respond. She simply pulled out her notebook and stared at the blank page. Her heart beat fast loudly. Painfully, but her face remained calm. She had trained herself to stay composed, no matter how many comments came her way. Silence was her shield. As the lesson went on, Alina tried to focus on the teacher's voice, but the constant whispers behind her made it impossible. Each comment was like a tiny needle puncturing her confidence. The worst part wasn't the bullying itself. It was the fact that no one else said anything. Not a single classmate stood up for her. Some watched quietly. Some pretended not to notice. Some even smiled at the bullies' jokes. In that moment, Alina realized that this school was just like the others she had been to. No matter how different the buildings or uniforms were, children could be cruel in the same ways everywhere. At recess, Alina walked to the courtyard with her lunchbox held close. She scanned the area for a quiet corner. She wasn't looking for friends, she was simply looking for peace. She sat down under a tree near the wall, opened her lunch, and began eating silently. But peace rarely lasted long. Within minutes, the bullies appeared again. "Well, look who we found hiding," Sana mocked, crossing her arms. "You're so quiet. It's creepy," Raida added. Fahad kicked a pebble near Alina's shoe. "Hey, new girl. Say something. Anything." Alina kept her gaze on her lunch, not because she was ignoring them, but because she didn't know how to respond without escalating things. Her silence only annoyed them more. "Ugh. She's so weird," Sana muttered loudly before the three left with laughs trailing behind them. Alina exhaled slowly, pressing her hand briefly over her chest, trying to ease the tightness. She had spent years learning to stay calm in moments like this. But that didn't mean it hurt any less. As she ate silently, she didn't notice that someone else had been watching Hassan, a boy from her class. He wasn't a bully. He wasn't loud. He wasn't popular. But he had something most students lacked: empathy. His eyes softened as he watched the scene unfold, guilt stirring inside him. He wanted to help. Say something. Anything. But fear held him back. What if they start bullying me too? He thought. And so he remained silent. Just like the rest. Alina finished her lunch and stood up slowly, brushing off crumbs before walking back to class. She moved quietly past groups of students, blending into the background like a shadow. Nobody knew that behind her silence lived a story that could change everything. Nobody knew the secret she carried. Nobody knew the strength hiding beneath her soft voice. And they had no idea that the quiet girl they mocked would soon leave the entire school speechless. The lunch bell rang loudly across the corridors, and the students rushed out of their classrooms like a wave released from a dam. The cafeteria filled with chatter, laughter, and the clatter of trays. In the far corner, at a small table nobody else ever chose, Alina quietly sat down with her lunch, a simple sandwich, an apple, and a bottle of water. She opened her lunchbox slowly, making sure not to disturb anyone. That was her way, quiet, careful, almost invisible. But even invisibility couldn't protect her today. Sana and Rita, the self-appointed, cool girls of the school, spotted her the moment they walked in. With them was Fahad, who loved attention just as much as they did. Their eyes lit up with mischief, the kind that never meant anything good. "Look who's hiding again." Sana smirked, nudging Rita. "She doesn't even talk." "Maybe she's mute," Rita whispered loudly on purpose. Fahad added with a laugh. "Or maybe she thinks she's too good to talk to us." They approached Alina's table like hunters closing in on prey. Alina noticed them coming. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept her eyes on her lunch. She prayed they would pass by. But bullies never pass by an easy target. "Well, well," Sana said, leaning over the table. "Eating alone again. What a surprise." Rita pretended to be shocked. "Alina, why don't you talk? Are you broken or something?" Students nearby turned to watch. Some laughed. Others simply observed silently, grateful they were not the ones being targeted. Alina swallowed hard but said nothing. She kept her gaze down, trying to remain calm. She wasn't weak, she was used to silence. Silence was her shield. Fahad reached for her lunch tray. "Let's help you make some friends, Before Alina could react, he tilted the tray, and her sandwich slid onto the floor. The apple rolled under another table. The cafeteria erupted in snickers. Someone whispered, "She deserves it. She's so weird." Another said, "Why doesn't she fight back?" But one person didn't laugh. Hassan, sitting at a table nearby, froze mid-bite. He had watched Alina since the first day, how she always sat alone, how she avoided trouble, how her eyes carried a sadness he couldn't understand. He hated bullying, but he also feared standing up to the popular kids. Fear made him quiet too. He saw Alina take a slow breath. She bent down, picked up the sandwich with her shaking hands, and gently placed it back in the tray, even though it was ruined. Her face didn't show anger. Only disappointment. A deep, heavy kind of pain she hid behind her silence. "Come on, say something," Sana taunted, leaning closer. "You're so quiet, it's creepy." For a moment, the cafeteria seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if Alina would finally snap or cry. But she didn't. Instead, she stood up not in aggression, but with a surprising grace. She gathered her broken lunch tray, hugged it close to her chest, and simply walked away without a single word. Her silence hit harder than any outburst could have. Hassan's heart tightened. He could see the slight wobble in her steps, the way she blinked rapidly to hold back tears. A simple lunch had become a battlefield. And Alina had walked away as if she were carrying the weight of the entire world. Rita laughed. "She's so dramatic." Sana rolled her eyes. "Whatever. She should learn to speak like a normal person." But even their laughter sounded hollow now. Hassan looked at them with a mixture of anger and disgust. For the first time, he felt ashamed not of Alina's silence, but of his own. He had sat there, watching. Doing nothing. Saying nothing. That made him no better than the bullies. Alina reached the cafeteria door, paused for a second, and then stepped outside. The door closed gently behind her, but inside, the atmosphere had shifted. Some students looked uncomfortable. Others exchanged glances, unsure if what they had witnessed was funny or cruel. A few whispered softly, "She didn't deserve that. I feel bad for her. Why do they keep picking on her?" Hassan pushed away his tray. He knew one thing for sure. He couldn't stay silent forever. Something had to change, starting with him. But none of them knew that Alina's silence wasn't weakness. It was strength. It was survival. And soon, the entire school would understand exactly who she was. And why she never fought back. And that revelation would leave everyone speechless. The morning began like any other at Crescent Public School, students rushing through the hallways, teachers preparing lessons, the usual preschool chatter echoing through the corridors. But today, there was a noticeable buzz. Whispers of excitement floated around because the school had announced a special motivational program in the auditorium. They didn't mention who the guest would be. Only that it would be someone young, inspiring, and nationally recognized. Even the bullies, Sana, Rita, and Fahad were excited. They joked about how boring it might be, unaware that the program would be the turning point of their lives. Meanwhile, Alina walked down the hallway with her usual quiet steps, clutching her books to her chest. She kept her eyes low, hoping to pass through the crowd unnoticed. She planned to sit in the back of the auditorium, away from everyone. The last few weeks had been hard, the bullying, the whispers, the constant judgment. She endured it in silence, just like she always had, but her heart carried a weight she never showed. As the students gathered, the auditorium filled quickly. The lights dimmed, and a hush fell across the room. The principal stepped onto the stage with a smile, holding the microphone. "Students, today we have someone very special with us, someone your age, but much wiser than many adults. A girl who has touched thousands of lives with her words. A young author, advocate for children's mental health, and a national youth speaker." The students looked at each other in surprise. A student who was famous. Sana leaned toward Rita and smirked. Probably some show-off from another school. Fahad laughed under his breath. "Whoever it is, they better be interesting," the principal continued. "Before I invite her on stage, let me tell you something important. Many of us judge people based on what we see on the outside. But often, the greatest strength lies behind quiet souls. Souls who have survived battles nobody knows about." Hassan, who was sitting quietly in the crowd, felt a strange tug at his heart. His mind immediately wandered to Alina, sitting alone somewhere in the back row. "And now," the principal announced, "please welcome Alina Farid." For a moment, the sound of her name didn't register. Then it hit them. Alina, the quiet girl? The one they bullied? The entire auditorium twisted in shock. All heads turned simultaneously toward the back rows where Alina sat frozen in her seat. Sana's jaw dropped. Rita gasped. Fahad blinked hard, thinking he misheard. Alina stood slowly, nerves rattling through her body. She took a deep breath. The teacher near her offered a gentle smile and whispered, "You're ready." And she was. She walked down the aisle toward the stage. Every step felt like a journey away from the fear she had lived with, toward the courage she had fought for. The students watched in stunned silence. No one whispered now. No one laughed. When she reached the stage, the principal handed her the microphone. Her hands trembled for a moment, but then, just like flipping a switch, the confidence she hid for so long rose to the surface. "Hello everyone," Alina began, her voice steady and warm. A wave of disbelief rippled through the students. She could speak clearly, beautifully, confidently. "I know most of you see me as the quiet girl," she continued. "Some of you mocked me for it. Some of you ignored me. And some hurt me." Her eyes momentarily met the bullies. They looked away, ashamed. "But what you didn't know," Alina said softly, "is that I wasn't quiet because I didn't want to talk. I was quiet because I was healing." A pin-drop silence filled the hall. She told them about her childhood trauma, her years struggling with selective mutism, the therapy she went through, and how writing became her escape. She explained how her first book, a collection of stories about kindness, won a national award and led to speaking events across the country. But when I joined this school, she continued, pausing, I didn't want anyone to know. I wanted a fresh start. I wanted to be treated like a normal student. Students exchanged uncomfortable glances. Guilt washed over many faces. I learned something important. Alina said as her voice grew stronger. People judge quickly. They assume the quiet person is weak, or strange, or unimportant. But silence doesn't mean emptiness. Sometimes silence is a shield, protecting a heart that has already survived too much. Some students wiped tears. Even teachers leaned forward, deeply moved. Alina smiled softly and added, and I hope you remember this, kindness is the only language that every heart understands, even the silent ones. When she finished, the crowd didn't clap immediately. They just sat there, stunned, absorbing her words. Then the applause erupted, loud, respectful, and emotional. For the first time since she joined the school, Alina wasn't invisible. She was seen. She was respected. She was admired. And the bullies felt something they never expected: shame, realization, and a desire to change. When the assembly ended, the hall remained strangely silent, a silence completely different from the kind that usually surrounded Alina. This time, it wasn't because people didn't know her. It was because suddenly, everybody did. The same students who once mocked her were now sitting frozen in their seats, trying to understand how they had bullied someone who had endured more pain and overcome more challenges than any of them could ever imagine. As students began filing out of the hall, whispers floated through the air, but they were nothing like before. There was no laughter, no gossip, only guilt, admiration, and a new sense of reflection. Alina remained near the stage, speaking softly with the principal, completely unaware of how deeply she had impacted the room. Hassan stood at the back, his heart pounding. He remembered every moment he had watched the bullies pick on her. Every moment he told himself, stay out of it. Don't get involved. But now, that voice felt cowardly. He realized he had chosen silence over kindness, fear over courage. And that choice had hurt someone who least deserved it. Gathering all his courage, Hassan walked slowly toward the stage. His palms were sweaty, and his throat tightened as Alina turned to look at him. But her expression was calm, gentle, there was no anger in her eyes. Only curiosity. Alina, he began, his voice low. I'm really sorry. She blinked, surprised. Few people had ever approached her directly, and even fewer with sincerity. Hassan continued, I saw them bully you. I saw everything. And I didn't do anything. I was scared. But that's no excuse. I should have stood up. Maybe you wouldn't have felt so alone. His voice cracked slightly, and he looked down in shame. For a moment, Alina didn't respond. She simply stared at him, processing his words. Then, she gave a soft smile, small, but warm enough to melt the anxiety in his chest. It's okay, she said quietly. You're apologizing now. That already means a lot. Thought. Her kindness shocked him. Someone who had every right to be angry chose forgiveness. Before he could say anything else, he heard footsteps behind him. Sana, Raida, and Fahad, the bullies, who once tormented her, stood there awkwardly. Their confident smirks were gone. Their shoulders slouched, eyes lowered. Faces filled with regret. Real regret, not the forced, shallow kind, but the heavy kind that makes you rethink the person you've become. Sana was the first to speak. Her voice trembled. Alina. We didn't know. We didn't know what you went through. We didn't know you were. She stopped herself because she realized the truth. They shouldn't have needed a reason to be kind. Raida wiped her eyes, embarrassed by her own tears. We were wrong. Completely wrong. You didn't deserve any of it. Even Fahad, who had always acted the toughest, looked like he wanted to disappear. I'm sorry, he whispered. I really am. Alina looked at them, really looked, and for a moment, the room felt heavy with the weight of unspoken pain and unexpected change. She could have rejected them, confronted them, or walked away. But instead, she inhaled softly and said, I forgive you. I hope you're kinder to everyone from now on. Not just to me. Her words didn't blame, didn't shame, they taught. The bullies nodded, tears forming in their eyes. They weren't just apologizing to fix their image, they were apologizing because they had been transformed by the truth. And they weren't the only ones. That afternoon, the whole school felt different. Students who usually mocked others suddenly began offering help. Classmates who rarely spoke to Alina now greeted her with respect. Teachers noticed the shift: less noise, more empathy. Fewer jokes at someone's expense, more awareness of people's feelings. In the cafeteria, the kids who once laughed at the spilled tray now invited her to sit with them. Some wanted to ask about her books, others simply wanted to say they admired her. But the biggest change happened inside the students themselves. Hassan felt it when he held the door for someone without thinking twice. Sana felt it when she stopped a younger student from being teased. Fahad felt it when he apologized to a boy he had insulted weeks ago. Alina's story had done something no punishment or lecture ever could. It made them feel guilty, feel inspired, feel human. Days later, posters appeared around the school. Kindness, first, always. The principal announced new anti-bullying workshops, inspired entirely by Alina. But the greatest change didn't come from the administration, it came from the students, who had finally understood the power of kindness. Alina walked through the hallways, no longer as the quiet girl, but as a symbol of courage, resilience, and purity of heart. And the school once filled with noise, judgment, and cruelty found silence. A silence born from respect. A silence that taught everyone a lesson they would never forget.